Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the TriStar webinar series. Today's topic is going to be tips and tricks in Creo Parametric. My name is Thiagu Palaniappan. I work for TriStar. We are the largest reseller for PTC products in North America. Just to let you know that this meeting or webinar will be recorded. So if you have any of your coworkers that would like to view it again, or if you would like to view it again, you can go to our resource center and the recording will be made available pretty much for all the webinars that we run on these Thursdays. All of you are in listen-only mode, so we have muted all the attendees. Towards the end, we will have a Q&A session. So if you could start typing in your questions as you see the presentation, or maybe you can wait till the end, it's up to you, but I'll try my best to answer as much as I can towards the end. Before we go through the webinar, just a quick note regarding some of the promotions or time-limited offers that we're running this quarter. About 5 of them. One regarding the trade-in of your existing perpetual license to subscription license. There's also a good discount on the MathCAD product from PTC, as well as Dell Workstation with Creo installed in it. We also have some offers around training, as well as the PTC ThingWorx Navigate licenses. So if you want to know more information about this, please reach out to your account reps at TriStar, or you could visit our website that will have more information about all these offers. That said, the agenda here is really to go over some general tips and tricks that might help and be useful for new as well as experienced users. We have already done quite a few webinars on what's new in Creo 4.0. So regardless of what release of Creo that you use, whether it's 4.0, 3.0, or 2.0, or even the wildfire releases, this webinar should kind of help you, just go through some of the nice tips and techniques on the core areas of Creo, namely sketching, part modeling, and assembly, right? So in the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to, just go over quite a few of the techniques and tips that I've seen many customers not aware of. So some of you may be aware of this, some of you may not be aware of it. So it'll be a good overview on all these 3 topics. And then towards the end, I'll look at the question area to see if I have any questions that I'll try to answer in the last 15-20 minutes or so. First off, Sketcher itself. Some of you may be using it, but I've not seen a lot of people utilize the Sketcher palette. In my view, the Sketcher palette will really make you more efficient when you work inside of Creo Parametric. This is something that has been there since Wildfire 3.0, way back since 2006, actually. So it's nothing new in Creo, but it's been there for a long time, wherein PTC gives you a lot of out-of-the-box. They have about 4 folders, as you can see, with polygons, profiles, shapes, and stars, what have you. But you could also customize this, add your own commonly used cross sections, right? And then you could use the config.pro Sketcher palette path, wherein you could essentially create new folders on top of the out-of-the-box ones, so that all the engineers in your company could be more efficient in their sketching process, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Even for a simple oblong slot, I would just use a raised track that's already there, right? And then scale it, change the dimension, constrain it, etc., right? So really quickly, if I were to go into my Creo, normally what I've seen is whenever you are in sketch mode, right? Let's say I'm in sketch mode and I would like to sketch, obviously we start using the basic tools like these, right? We start going over, for example, all the tools that we have, which we are aware of, like let's say I want to draw like a 3-tangent arc here. I might also want to trim this, something like that, right? And you see the issues that I run into here when I trim it, and of course I can get around it and do the slot. However, instead of spending the time with all these basic steps, could I just save some time by going into the Sketcher palette and simply drag and drop, for example, the racetrack, right? And then, you know, scale it up or down, rotate it, dimension it. So what you see in here is a Sketcher palette that's out of the box, right? Out of the box, whatever you see here by PTC, those are the folders you have. But what if I wanted to add my own, right? How do I add additional ones? For example, on this design here, I might want to just capture or extract a particular sketch that I'm interested in. What I could do is I could essentially go to the sketch and then do a save, and then save that sketcher, right? I could just save that file. Let's say we'll call it lobe or something like that. And I'm saving it as a section file. So moving forward in any other design, right? If I were to go and create a new part, or if I were to start creating a new sketch, I should be able to go into my Sketcher palette, and there is my user-defined folder right there, which has that section that I can just now, you know, drag and drop and start using it. Again, I can assign some scaling factor for that, right? I can start placing it, and I can start working through my design. So just an FYI there on, you know, how you could make use of your Sketcher palette, right? So you can, let me get back to my presentation here. You can also use a Sketcher palette path, right, where you could set up a folder. It could be a library location inside of Windchill, or it could be in a network drive, and then you can start using this throughout the company, so that everybody uses the same type of cross sections that they could, you know, start using it from scratch. Some of the best practices here around constraining that might come in handy, whether you are using Creo 4 or Creo 3, right? The right mouse button before Creo 4 and now the mini toolbar is a quick access to all the 9 constraints you have. Depending on what you select, it automatically gives you those constraint options. As well as when you add constraints, you can quickly enable, disable lock constraints. Some of you may not prefer the software automatically constraining or snapping to other geometry or references. In that case, you could hold down the Shift key, which will prevent automatic constraining. You could also use the Tab key, so you can switch from one constraint to another constraint, for example. And using the control, if you hold down the control key, you will be able to extend any line or arc quickly. It's a quick workaround to the trim tool, right? So these are the things that some of you may have tried it, but all these have been there since the old Creo or even the old Wildfire releases. Since as a good practice, we recommend doing a rough shape constraining and then dimensioning as always, and then changing the value. So what are the different best practices in constraining, right? That's quite important too. So let's say I want to take a look at that one here. The quickness with which you're able to add constraints. I would like to make these two circles equal. I'm holding down the control key, selecting it, and it gives me the choices right away, right? If it was not Creo 4, I would have used a right click and it would have given this all the way, right? So I could say, okay, let's make that equal, or let's make these two, I would like to make them coincident or maybe horizontally aligned, or I might want to make these two coincident. So it's more like you're focusing on your design rather than the user interface, right? Maybe selecting the center of the circle, and then I'm just saying, let's do a midpoint constraint right away, right? So depending on what entities you pick, you know, and using the mini toolbar in Creo 4, it's going to be a lot more easier where you don't focus on the interface, but you're focusing on your design. I want to make these two guys perpendicular. I might want to make these two guys, for example, parallel. I might also want to make those two equal in length. I might want to make them vertical. And I might want to just attach this to this reference or constrain it to the reference. And all those mini toolbars can be customized as well. So if I have a situation where I have an open sketch like this, I can essentially say, let's just close it out. Let's also make sure it's tangent, right? And when you want to add automatic constraints as you sketch, there are times when you start sketching your line, for example. I'm starting to sketch another line right here. Let's say I want to do another line. As you can see here, if I want to have a very small angle right there, it doesn't allow me. It snaps to either horizontal or vertical. What is a workaround that is you can just hold down the shift key and the system will never assume any constraint. I'm holding down the shift key so it doesn't, really assume any constraints for me, but as I let go, it starts assuming constraints for me. Sometimes you might run into a situation where you have more than one constraint option available. So if I were to zoom in here, I'm getting the option to parallel or equal, right? As I get that, I could just lock the equal, for example. However, the parallel, I don't want that parallel to be on. I can just use my tab key in my keyboard and say, don't make it parallel. So I'm kind of locked to equal. However, I can change the angle, and then I can keep sketching it. So those are some of the tools, right? The shift, as well as the right mouse click to quickly toggle between multiple constraint types. That would be very handy. You can also use a replace in sketch mode, very powerful when you make design changes. As you all know, in product design, one thing that's constant is the design change that we do. Try making a huge change in the base feature, and then you're gonna good luck with that, right? I mean, you're spending like half hour, 45 minutes trying to fix the children that were dependent on that reference. So if I want to replace that line with with 3 lines or an arc, it's easy to do that in the base feature. However, depending on how many other features were dependent on it, it might not be worthwhile deleting and recreating it. You might want to start quickly replacing it. So the replace command, pretty powerful. It's been there since the old Pro Engineer days, and even now it's there where you can quickly replace. The advantage of replacing is your geometry ID remains the same, so that you will not get into a missing reference regeneration failure. So what I'm talking about is if I were to get into, let's say I have a part like this, and I'm asked to make a quick change on one of these, this line should be gone. I'm deleting it, and this is almost like saying prepare for failure, right? You see, it tells you that the entity is referenced by other features. I have no choice but to delete it. And let's throw in a quick arc somewhere there. So all I did was I'm throwing in an arc. The extrude looks fine. However, I have a regeneration failure right there, right? If I go and look at the information tools, there is a missing reference. You can see how that ID is no longer there, right? The good thing is, at least in Creo 3.0, starting that, it tells you what is a missing reference. And now it's just a matter of me selecting that reference. But is there a better practice, right? I know I could just right now go into my missing reference wherever it missed that reference right here. I could just reselect it and I'm all good. But in a much more complicated design, this may not be a worthwhile methodology, right? To replace things, right? So a better practice might be simply to go in and sketch the arc first. So for example, in this case, let's say I want to quickly create the arc and replace it with the other, I'm going to replace the line with the arc instead of deleting it. Thereby, it will maintain the ID, and this time the left-hand side round doesn't fail, as you can see. And sometimes you might want to even, try, when you get a chance, try doing that. You could even replace this with, let's say you had a situation where you had multiple geometries like this. Line to an arc was simple. It was able to replace the ID. How's it going to behave when I have an arc to be replaced with this multiple geometry shapes? Guess what? You could divide. There's a divide tool, as you know, in Creo, which allows you to divide this entity into 3, regenerate the section first, and then replace this guy with this, replace this guy with this, and this with this. So really, you can make drastic design changes using this method. It's a simple thing, but it goes a long way in making your models more robust to design changes. Scale, rotate, and resize is a very commonly used thing in sketch mode. You saw me drag and drop that from the Sketcher palette. I use a sketch. I dragged and dropped it. The way you quickly move the origin, by default, the origin is always the centroid of the rectangle encompassing the section, no matter how small or large a section is, or whatever shape or it is. But you could always right mouse drag, hold down the right mouse button, drag the origin to wherever you want, and then you can snap it. Similarly, there are situations where you're working on a complicated sketch, but this config option is one of my favorites, where sometimes I toggle it to no, right? Because I don't want you to refit every time. I understand most of the time it's good to refit, but I'm zoomed in into this image, as you see in the left-hand side. I'm going to change that 25 dimension, but as soon as I'm done with that, I don't want you to always zoom out and refit. There's a config.pro for that, which might be handy. Sketcher refit after dimension modify. You could set that to no, so it just remains. It allows you to continue in that same zoomed in area, especially let's say you imported a very complex DXF or DWG file, a 2D sketch, and you're trying to tweak it, right? So let's say I'm going to create a new design here. However, I do have a sketch that I'm going to import. And let's just scale it up. Now, the goal is to, for example, constrain this vertex onto that reference. As you can see, I'm able to only constrain this origin. I can right mouse drag on it and then left drag on it, right? Now I have constrained it, scale it up or down, rotate it, what have you. But then I'm looking at this, and let's say if I want to turn on my dimensions here, I do, and I've zoomed in this region right here, and I'm planning to change this. And let's set it to like 15 or something like that. See how it kind of zooms out every time. Now, this might be the good thing for the most part, but there are situations when you're working on a very complicated sketch, you might want to stay in this view, and for that, you have the config.pro that you might want to add right here, the Sketcher refit after dim modify. And if I set that to no, and let's say I'm going to save that currently to my config. And if I set it back to 35, you see how it stays there. It doesn't zoom out, zoom in automatically, right? This is something that might come in handy, especially when you work on a very complex sketch. Now, these are the type of configs that you keep turning on and off. So a nice little tip here would be to add it to a favorite. Some of you may be doing it, but if not, that's a nice thing. I can add it to a favorite. When I add it to my favorite list, I have the option to quickly go to options menu, and in my favorites, all I have to do is turn it on and off right there, as you can see here, right? I could say that I want that to be turned on or off, as you can see here, right? So that's a nice little thing where some of the commonly changed configs, I should say, could be added to your favorites right here. And I could just turn it back on. That has changed my config. Now, if I zoom in and set it to anything, right, it's going to back to how it was, right? And another nice thing about Sketcher is the lock scale, especially when you do your first sketch in Creo, right? It's very handy where it comes up with some huge numbers. That's because of the size of the datum plane, which you can change. But lock scale maintains a proportion of all the other dimensions when you make that first initial change. So, for example, let me redefine one of these sketches here. As you can see, I have some big values, right? 290, 370, 140, something like that. But let's say the height of my product is supposed to be 16 units. What happens if I set that to 16? It's not going to work because it has a conflict here, right? This is 140. How can that be 16? So I could essentially drag a window, select all the dimensions, and simply say, let's modify. And in the modify box, one of my favorites is this lock scale, pretty nice, where when I hit lock scale, and if I change one dimension, look at that, it has automatically maintained the proportion of my shape. So I did a rough shape, capturing my design intent, and then I'm changing the value, one value, and everything else remains, kind of maintains that proportion or the ratio. There are also a couple of configs while we're on dimensioning, wherein sometimes once you have locked down your design intent, you don't want any accidental changes. The Sketcher lock modified dimensions config.pro will automatically lock modified dimension, meaning whenever you change the value of a dimension, it understands that, okay, you have locked it down. You can still make a change by editing the value, but you cannot make accidental changes by dragging it. Some users might prefer even Sketcher dimension auto lock. That's a nice option to have, where as soon as you create any dimension in sketch mode, it will automatically be locked, meaning you can still make a change, but you can prevent accidental modification using these config options that used to be my favorite during my industry days. You can also quickly import inside of Sketch. So if you have any legacy drawings, whether it's from AutoCAD, DWG, DXF, or it could even be an Adobe Illustrator file, or it could be from your Creo drawing file. One common complaint from customers that I've seen is, or they run into this big pain point where when they import very complex 2D geometry, you get this, you're attempting to import too many of them, and sometimes it'll try its best, it works, sometimes it crashes, or sometimes it will not even import. Now, the reason for that is it's trying to calculate the dimensioning, the constraining, all in one go while importing it. So a good workaround around this is simply hide the constraints and dimensions before import, and it'll work pretty nicely after that. All you have to do is just hide the dimensions and constraints, and you will see after that, it is not going to, and then you can enable, and that's a good workaround, like I'm importing that logo or sketch right there from a DWG or a DXF into my Creo sketch mode. And then if you're running into issues, you can use this technique, a nice technique that I've used. So again, let's say I want to create a new part, and I'm in this new design here, and I'm planning to get into sketch mode, and I would like to import. Now, what are the things I can import? I can always, as always, I can import Adobe Illustrator, DWG, DXF, even a Creo sketch file, DRW file, etc. So let's, I want to go into one of my drawing files that I might have. And there it is. And let me just, let's say I want to just extract these, right? Now, before I extract these, right, before I import that, good practice is to hide dimensions and constraints. And then let's say I want to go into the drawing file, and I might want to just say, let's import this. And let's say I want to set up a scaling factor for that right there. Just let's increase it. And now I could enable my dimensions and constraints, right? Usually the problem is the intent manager is trying to solve for it while it's importing. So that's a good workaround whenever you run into an issue with your import of 2D geometry into your sketch environment. You have a new workflow for changing the orientation if you're sketching plane. Pretty nice compared to the old setup dialog box. You can quickly set up anything as your horizontal or vertical reference while you're in sketch mode. Pretty nice workflow that's there in the Creo releases compared to the old release. So that's another nice tip here. So if I were to go into my Creo, so say I have a part like this, I want to sketch right on that face. When I hit sketch view, I would have expected this to be my horizontal reference, but the software picked up its own reference, and you know why? Because of the sketch setup, right? If I go to my sketch setup, it always has these references in here, right? The right is right, etc. Instead of using that to change it, I could quickly go say, I want my horizontal reference to be this guy here, so that when I build my geometry, I might want to make that horizontal or maybe make parallel to that reference. That's my design intent. So I was able to quickly change the reference there, or I could say I want my section orientation reference. I could either restore it, or I could say my vertical reference is going to be this one, and it'll become a vertical reference right there. Or I can also go say I want you to face the right of the screen, so I can flip that left of the screen, or I could even go and say I want to flip the sketching plane anytime, right? It's much better practice than using the old sketch setup dialog box. When you write relations, as you know, it's a good practice to write relations inside of the sketch mode whenever possible, especially when you have a feature situation like this where you already have a solid geometry and then you're creating a new feature. And I would like to capture the overall dimension. You see the KD4. There's a way to add a known dimension in Sketcher that can drive another dimension in the new feature. So SD is a Sketcher dimension, KD is a known dimension. You can do that. And the advantage here is you're able to see the change or the relations coming into effect in real time, right? And it's regenerated along with the feature, right? So Sketcher, it's the Sketcher relation rather than a feature-to-feature relation. Again, to do that, all you would really do is you'd simply go to your Creo and you can add, in sketch mode, you should be able to add known dimensions pretty quickly. So for example, if I'm, let's see here, if I were to be in this feature definition, for example, I have a sketch, and if I enable my dimensions right there, I might want to add a new dimension. So I could essentially go to dimension and say, maybe let's add a dimension between this, and I'm able to do that dimension, even though I've not sketched anything. And if I look at my model intent and switch the dimensions, you see how this is a known dimension versus a Sketcher dimension, right? So now I could simply go into my relation and say, I might want to control this guy and say that has to be this known dimension divided by 5, for example. As you can see here now, the relation is being calculated in the sketch environment itself rather than after the feature definition or after the feature regeneration. That's the advantage here. Slowly moving on to part and assembly here slowly, right? While we were in sketch mode, the Phillip command. Why do we even have the Phillip command in the Creo sketch mode, right? I mean, it's a good practice not to use a fillet and complicate your sketch. Like in this upper picture, I would have left it sharp and then extruded it so I can add the round as a round feature rather than a fillet instead of the sketch. But then why do we have a fillet, right? In a situation like this, at the bottom picture here, where I might want to control the bend radius, and for manufacturing, I might also want to show the theoretical sharp. There, yes, absolutely, I might want to do a sweep. That's where you should be using the fillet, and not in situations like this. I would rather leave this sharp. You know, the design intent here is, again, to make sure that it's as robust as possible, and the rounds should be done as a separate feature as late as possible in the design, right? Also, when you create rounds, how do you create the rounds to make it more robust to design changes? As far as possible, we should be using intent edge or intent surface. For example, intent edge allows you to create a parent-child relationship to the feature rather than the geometry. The common mistake that many customers make is selecting references individually like this. So if I were to pick the 6 edges individually, each edge has an ID, right? So if one of the edges goes missing, or if you have more edges, the round is going to fail, obviously. Instead of that, could we just tie it to the intent chain, right? So that any change that happens like here, it will update automatically, right? It's a constant round. The round has to be the same radius there. This works even with the draft feature right here, where I've added a draft, but instead of selecting all the surfaces, I picked up the intent surface. So the intent is better than using multiple surfaces, right? Always, when you pick surfaces and edges, a good practice to use intent surface or intent edge using query selection. So this way, if I make any change, the draft will never fail. It's going to be more robust to design changes there. So I could have gone into this extrude here, and I know I could have done the fillet. And in one shot, I could have made them all equal also, right? I could do this, and I could extrude it, make it, let's say, some depth in here, and call it a day. Not a good practice, right? Doing it this way. Let me undo that. So I want to go to the original file with the sharp edges, extrude that, and then when I do it as a round again, am I going to go to edge? I could do a round, but this is another common bad practice out there where you keep selecting the edges one by one. What happens when I pick the edges? You got to remember, every edge has an ID, and you're adding more references. When you make a big change, this round will definitely fail. So instead of doing it this way, is there a way to capture the features definition automatically using intent edge? I did a query selection, a right click, and I was able to get the intent chain going. Now, if I make any change to the original shape, for example, for whatever reason we wanted to change that original shape to some other shape, the intent chain knew to capture the round. So if I go to my round definition, as you can see, it is an intent edge rather than multiple references in there. And the same thing works even for a draft feature. So for example, if I were to get back here and I want to add a draft, I could just pick the intent surface. You could always use the pick from list to get the intent surface, or just that right click query to get to the intent surface, right? And now I could say my draft hinge is this guy, and there it is, right? And now if any change happens to that, just like before, the draft doesn't fail, it carries over that intent. So very good practice when you create features, right? But then why do we have fillets in the first place? I mean, if fillets are not supposed to be used in the sketcher, what is the intent behind that? Now, the reason for that is you could have a situation where you might want to throw in say I need to have kind of like a sweep profile. I'm just drawing the trajectory of a sweep, and this would be a classic case where you might want to draw the fillet in there, because in reality you might also want to draw the point, right, where for your dimensioning purposes you might want to add those dimensions, right, for manufacturing. They would obviously want to know from the theoretical sharp, that dimension. You might want to know this dimension here, as well as a bin radius, right, as you can see there. And this is something that, yeah, absolutely, I can now go and use a sweep. And let's say I want to go into the sketch environment and create that. So this is where, when we edit such type of features, yes, absolutely, I might want that fillet to change the bend radius or what have you, right? So there is a reason why we have the fillet, but unfortunately, people use it in extrude also, and make it in extrudes and revolves whenever possible, on shapes. You should be creating as a separate feature, right, rather than including it. And whenever you have missing references, starting with Creo 3 and 4, you may have to regenerate your legacy files. Please remember to use edit references, which is a quicker way to replace your references, right? It'll even highlight the missing reference, like I showed you with the example of the replace command in the sketch environment. There's always this question about when to use control key, when to use alt, when to use shift, and really there's so many places where Creo really allows you to be a lot more efficient and faster, you know, whether it be to quickly do like a seed and boundary selection using the shift key, or using the shift to snap to references, or if you're designing a sheet metal flange, how to pick multiple edges, you use a shift key, right? It's almost like picking a range of items. Or you can use the Control C, Control V options to quickly create a composite curve. You can also use Control Alt to move components while assembling. So all these, you should be very good at these. So let me try my best to kind of quickly show you a few of these techniques if you have not used before. For example, the first thing, if I were to, let's say I had this piece way down here, I would like to quickly redefine this, and instead of doing up to surface always, hold down the shift key and I can snap to it anytime, right? And this has been there since the old Wildfire releases right there, right? It's kind of like up to surface, the shift key allows you to snap there. Another place where you could use the shift key is when you add, for example, I want to quickly add sheet metal, like let's say I want to add design an enclosure real quick here. I want to go for flange. Would I do one by one? Or can I just hold on the shift key, get to the surface loop, and get all four done in one shot? The advantage being, you could see how you could get the corner relief. You can even control the miters. You can control the type of corner relief if you want, what type of corner relief you want, V-notch, etc. But you got it accomplished in one shot, but the key was the shift to get those going, right? Similarly, you could even use this methodology in selecting multiple surfaces. So there's a very common thing where there are times where you might want to select several surfaces quickly, right? It could be for in finite element analysis, it could be for creating a fluid volume maybe, or sometimes you want to assign pressure, or sometimes, it could just be to select the geometry for the die or punch when you do a sheet metal punching operation, for example, right? Or forming operation, I should say. In such situations, we don't want to be spending Control key to select several hundred surfaces there. All you do is select the seed, and then you hold down the shift to grab the boundary. So it bounds at that. I'm going to just do another boundary here, and I'm going to do another boundary. When I did that, you see how I got all the inside surfaces only, because that side thin surface was the boundary. It selects everything between the seed and the boundary except the boundary, right? Now I could do, for example, a copy paste on that. I got the quilt, or I could apply. So I have a surface that I quickly selected using the loop seed and boundaries option there, right? So if I go to what is selected right here, it kind of tells me it's using the seed and boundary surface. You could also use these quick techniques, using these keyboard shortcuts in a place where you might want to, for example, create get rid of these patches when you did the surface boundary blend, right? When you do that, so let's go back here, and I'm going to unhide these two sketches. So as you can see, this sketch obviously has line, arc, line, etc. But couldn't I simply do a copy paste on that? Control C, Control V gives me the ability to create a composite curve, make it approximate where it's creating a curvature continuous curve in here, right? With curvature continuity. And now I could essentially hide the other guy and say, if I want to do a boundary blend, I could just essentially say, let's do a boundary blend between this curve and this curve. And there you go. You see that you don't see, I'm on shading with edges, and I don't see those patches are removed because it's a curvature continuous curve. It's also a curvature continuous surface. A great way to create a high quality smooth surface there. Again, just a few things on on using these. These are very important. I know these are small things, but in my view, when you're designing, all these should help. Finally, in Creo 4, some of you may have heard about what's new in Creo 4, but one of the biggest things that I like, two big things that I like in Creo 4 from a usability standpoint to make you more efficient for the basic user or the core user is that they have a mini toolbar now. You saw me do things so fast so far. I never focused on right mouse button click or never went to the toolbar, to the ribbon. Everything is there. They have 3 rows: edit, feature, and visibility. And the good thing is all that can be customized, and they're available in pretty much all the modes: part mode, sheet metal, sketch, assembly, and simulate. Right? If you use Creo Simulate, also you get a toolbar. So essentially the idea is, the goal is you don't have to worry about where the commands are. You're essentially just customizing almost like a floating toolbar that you have, and this allows us to even work in a full screen mode. I really like this full screen mode that we have in Creo 4. Not sure how many of you have tried it. Just hit the F11 or hit the full screen mode. So in my view, mini toolbar and full screen mode, right, these two together really will make designing in Creo fun, and it's going to be a lot more productive for all of you if you start using this workflow or getting used to it, right? Because you don't have to think about, okay, where is the command? Or it's more like you're working on your design, focusing on the work that you're supposed to be doing on the engineering design, rather than figuring out where is that command, right? Where did they move now in Creo 4? Where did they do that, etc. So it's a very good thing in Creo 4. Those two things are new to Creo 4. All the others I talked about so far could be done even in the prior releases. So what I'm getting at when I'm talking about full screen mode is, let me kind of quickly show you that. Say I have a frame assembly here. I could be in full screen mode by clicking at the bottom here. There's a little full screen or F11 key. There it is, right? You can always exit that anytime. The nice thing is, on demand, I can get my screen, but I have a lot more real estate to work with, as you can see, right? So now I should be able to just say, okay, let's say I want to get to this component, right? I want to get to that feature, or maybe I want to get to that part, right? I could either select it here, right? Or I could just say, let's select that. I could make an edit definition edit. As you can see here, I have that. I can hide it. So for example, I want to quickly hide that feature, or even the component, right? I could even do it here if I have to, right? I could just go to this link and say I can activate it. I could hide it here upon demand. Maybe I wanted to have resume another component here. And this component, maybe I want to activate, right? And I can just start extruding right off my screen without going into my ribbon UI or anything. So let's say I had a very simple piece that I'm creating to connect these two assemblies in the frame assembly, the bike frame assembly. Now, having done that, I could do a Control-C, Control-V. What is that? Copy-pasting the same feature again. Why did I do that? Because I know when I copy-paste, I could copy-paste this with a different sketch. And when I copy-paste with a different sketch, I get to maybe assign, let's say, so I'm repeating the feature using an alternate sketch. So you can see several tips here. I'm focusing on the design at the same time reusing that design. So again, let me do another paste. But this time, I'm going to use the same sketch again. But to remove material, right there. Or I decided, okay, I had enough in this view. Let me just open it in part mode, and I can work off of here. Again, I can go to full screen mode, right? As you can see here. And I could start, let's say, okay, this cut is what I wanted. I could do a copy paste on that, and I could say, okay, maybe we want to copy paste this surface right here, or this sketch. I'm able to go remove everything. and maybe again copy paste and say, let's select the slot here. I have predefined a few external sketches, obviously, and so I'm kind of able to work, focus on the design and much more faster and efficient, right? Having done all this, maybe I might want to just, add some strength to this, right? Maybe I might want to, again, do a copy paste, but this time on an open sketch. It works nicely on even an open sketch. I could just go thicken that sketch and just give the thickness a little bit bigger there. But I have a problem here. This surface is supposed to be flush with that. Again, Control-C, Control-V, I'm copy pasting that surface. When I do that, I can now do an offset. I mean, this is something you can do even before, but the mini toolbar makes things so nice, right? I could say, let's replace that with this, and I just made it flush, just like that, right? So I don't have to go to my toolbar, figure out where, or my mini, the ribbon interface, or go here, right? I mean, the good thing is upon demand you can do it, but this full screen mode is a really great way to work in the design there. Okay, so there are also a lot of keyboard shortcuts. Your old keyboard shortcuts, they are there, but starting Creo 4, there are also a lot of assigned shortcuts, a lot more than before. You can even create your own shortcuts for commands. So you can filter by saying, show me the commands without assigned shortcuts and with assigned shortcuts, right? Another nice thing in the part modeling world is to reuse geometry again and again, right? The UDFs are a great example for that. I mean, user-defined features allows you to create a template or like a group file so that others in the company can reuse that geometry again and again. It could be in sheet metal design, it could be in regular part modeling. It could even be to create, for example, a UDF with a family table for an SAE port like this, right? Imagine this one, redoing this again and again or modifying that revolve feature. You could just create that as a user-defined feature, and then the user-defined feature can be family tabled. So when you place a UDF, you get to select the size that you want off of that. And geometry pattern, as always, it's a good practice to use geometry pattern. It is very helpful for faster regeneration time. This works on Creo files and non-Creo files as well, right? The advantage here is it's not using the feature definition. You're just using geometry pattern. So it's essentially like a pattern of your copy geometry feature. So it's going to be lightweight. It wouldn't take as much time to regenerate. The file size is decreased. It's still a solid feature though. A great tool when you work in non-Creo files as well as in Creo files where you can quickly remove. You can just say, I don't have the time to redefine the parent-child relationship when I get rid of this feature. Can I quickly just get rid of that geometry for now? I could just select the surface and say remove. When you remove, it essentially fills it. So you can see the same cut that I have here. That was an imported step file maybe, and I just filled it out right there. And maybe I'm defeaturing for FEA purposes or even for some other downstream manufacturing purposes. A rip feature, it's a very powerful, especially for injection molded parts, where the trajectory rib is one thing that I really like, where it allows you to add the draft and the round all in one shot, right? It essentially allows you to sketch the top view, and then you can just add the drafts and the rounds, the exposed rounds at the top and the bottom, all in one shot, with the ability to externalize that round so that keeping up with the best practice of creating rounds as late as possible. When you do variable round, one common question I've seen from customers is you can quickly add variable rounds, but how do you add additional reference points, right? You can just right-click and go to location reference. This is a better practice than dragging it all the way around. So what I'm talking about is, let's see, get back to here. Let me just exit the full screen mode. Creating the variable radius itself is quite easy. I've added the variable radius, but at this point, right, trying to, struggling to get into here and there and all that, right? A better practice is simply location reference, and then you could just hover over any of the edges. That's where I want. and of course you can control it the length ratio. But now if I want to add another, I'm just going to go location reference, and maybe I want one there. So it's very handy, nice little thing to be aware of, where you could quickly add additional control points when you do your variable round feature. And then variable pull, right? As you know, by default, when you do a draft, the pulling direction always has to be planar. But what if you have a situation like here, where your pulling direction or your draft has to be normal at every point through that curved 3D surface? You could go use the variable pull direction draft. This has been there again for a long time, but you could select that as your pulling direction, just select the hinges, and it's almost like it's doing a sweep. The workaround before was to create a sweep, but you don't have to do the sweep. It automatically ensures that the resulting angle stays normal at every point along that curve or along that surface. A great way to create quick 3D curves in Creo is to intersect two 2D curves. I have two 2D curves, control select them, intersect, and create a 3D curve. So you sketch two 2D curves in two different planes, and then use the intersect feature, and allows you to create that. So for example, if I want to, let me just go back here. To create something like this, right, all I have to really do is control select the two sketches here and use the intersect feature. Again, that's something I could, customize in my mini toolbar. There it is. So essentially the software is simply extruding this guy. It's also extruding this guy here. And then I'm getting the intersection point. A very common question on the assembly side, right? Whenever I try to assemble two parts, I'm getting normal instead of coincident. How do I handle that? There are some really nice config options that used to be there even before that you'll have to play around with. One is the auto constraint, always use offset. If you set it to never, right, the default is no. If you set it to never, you will get coincident constraints when you use like two planes or two linear edges, or an axis and a plane, or a plane and an edge, right? And then if you set this to yes, then it will use angle or normal, right? And then if you set it to no, what it'll do is it will just pick up the right constraint based on how you had oriented it. So let's say it was roughly at 90 degree or close to 90, then it'll pick up normal. Otherwise, it'll become coincident. So what is that tolerance that really helps with these type of constraints? There are a couple more config options that you should be aware of, which is the comp angle offset EPS. That stands for the epsilon angle. This really determines if you're going to get an angle constraint or a normal constraint. So try to apply a value of -1 or -91. And if you try these two, you will see how it behaves, all automatically sets to normal or automatically sets to angle, right? There is also sometimes you have seen whenever you try to assemble, the constraints will show up with an offset value rather than coincident. Just use this auto constraint offset tolerance config option. Default is 0.5 actually. So what it really does is 0.5 is multiplied by the model size. The model size is the largest diagonal size of the part that you design in Creo, right? Every component has its own model size, relatively speaking, right? So it uses that. So if it is less than 0.5 times the model size, then it'll be coincident. If it's more than that, it will just leave it as distance. So these 5 options is something that you should try to play around with just to make your assembly process more efficient, okay? And I talked about this earlier, where whenever you add config.pro options, it's a good practice to add to favorites so that you could go quickly to the favorites, and then you can keep adding or changing those config options. You don't have to go through all the config options that you don't care about. I would suggest adding it to favorites. And whenever you do assembly, sometimes there are situations where I might want the same component to be in two different positions? How is it possible? Just assemble it with multiple constraint sets, and you can turn one constraint set with the other constraint set by using a parameter in your model tree called PTC Constraint Set. So as you can see here, I have three constraints set, and I can select any of those constraints set, and that will become active. I can even use this in a family table, wherein I could use that parameter to switch the position of the part. And as always, generally when you apply constraints in assembly mode, it's a good practice to keep double-clicking on the 3D nodes. That is better than going to the component placement slide-up menu in the ribbon or in the dashboard. It just quickly allows you to change the reference type, constraint type, or change the references just by double-clicking on these 3D nodes. Again, going back to the full screen mode way of designing, where you focus on the design rather than the interface. And when constraining, as always in parts, as you know, you may have hidden or put in layers all the datum features. How do you use them or select them? Do you have to unhide them? You don't have to. Just use the Control F for the search. While adding or selecting constraints, if you use the search tool, it allows you to highlight hidden geometry or hidden datums. It'll highlight which one it is, and you can move it over to the right here, and then you can select it for constraining. Okay. Many of you may be using the 3D dragger, but Control-Alt, if you hold on the Control-Alt, you can move, right? You can reorient the part while the assembly will stay put. And I really like this config.pro option called Component Assemble Start. If you set it to move then place, what it does is you don't have to always go and spend your time moving the components. It will automatically attach to your cursor. Try that config option, and you might like it when you do assembly, right? There is a way to display constraints in the model tree. The only thing is you'll have to make sure the placement folder is turned on. Then it'll highlight all the constraints, right? Many times you don't want the feature, you just want to have the constraints just to see how it is constrained. And let's say you want to avoid package constraining. What is package components? Meaning it's not fully constrained. You could set up a config option, package constraint, and set it to disallow. By default, it's not set to this. So when you hit disallow, it will never allow you to even package a component. It'll always look forward to fully constraining the part by the user. Okay, you're forcing the user to fully constraining it. There are also some nice model tree status icons. I think most of you may be aware of it, but whenever you get this black box, as you know, that is the suppressed feature. You get sometimes a rectangle with a dot. That means it's connected and it's not constrained. And you also have a pause button, the frozen component, which is no longer there with Creo 3, but prior to that we used to have. And a rectangle shows me that it is packaged or it's not fully constrained. Two rectangles, like double box, tells me that you have constrained it to a part that is packaged, right? You can also turn on these couple of config options here, display pop-up viewer, pre-highlight tree. Those are some handy ones that I like, where when you work on assembly mode, you might want to cursor over the part in the tree and still have a nice little thumbnail preview of it. These are some config options that will help you through that. Also, I would like the part to be highlighted in the tree when I select it in the model, right? In a session, what changes have I done? I could right-click on any assembly and say View Changes, and until you have saved, it will give you in color code right here as to what was suppressed, what was deleted, what was reordered. It's a quick snapshot just to kind of review what changes you did since the last save. It also has search in the model tree in assembly mode, where it'll give you color-coded ones, right? Show me all the failed items, packaged components, right? And you can further configure it using additional queries. And if you have the Advanced Assembly Extension license, the AAX license really allows you to add interchange assemblies. It's almost like a bucket with all your variants, a good alternative family table. Again, you can just reference tag them and quickly swap them in your top-level assembly. Okay. And the last one here about component interface. Whenever you want to quickly assemble standard parts again and again, it's a good practice to predefine the interface at the part level so it knows, you can drag and drop and quickly apply constraints or assemble the parts rather than selecting the geometry step by step. Flexible components obviously is a great way to assemble the same part in different geometry states, right? You can even have it with different parameters, different material for different occurrences of the same part, okay? We always talk about some of the useful links, but just like this webinar, there are a lot more webinars that have been done by my team or our engineering team. Feel free to check those out in our resource center. As always, you can also access the Learning Exchange site of PTC and the knowledge base that has a lot of information. So, so all this has a lot of good information that if you are a new user or an experienced user, you should be going through this, and it'll definitely help. Okay. Let me see if there are any questions in the chat session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type in the question area or in the chat session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type those in the question area. Okay, there's a question on the GTOL datums. Okay, why was the placement option for GTOL datums removed? You used to be able to attach a GTOL to a dimension in a drawing. Now it seems the only way is with model-based designing and attaching a datum to that. That's right, Kevin. What PTC's direction moving forward is model-based design, as you know, MBD. So that's why they had to really change the way GTOLs, generally the way you created geometric, the datums, right, the datum references and the geometric tolerances in general. They wanted to make it a lot more easier, and that's and in that process, I see a few things have been gone, but yeah, that's something that we will let PTC know. Thanks. Just a reminder on those 5 offers this quarter, on the time-limited offers. Feel free to reach out to your account reps, or please visit TriStar.com to get more information on these time-limited offers that we are running through end of September. There's one more question here. Is Creo 4.0 executable larger than Creo 3? Does it run more efficiently, for example, with regeneration of large assemblies? That's a good question. I mean, the executable itself is not large. However, when it comes to managing large assemblies and regeneration time-wise, Creo 4, yeah, as always, PTC tells us that they have been improving each release. They try to help improve large assemblies. But specific to large assemblies, one big enhancement they did in Creo 4.0 is the automatic representation, right? Many of the legacy representation that we used to have, like geometry rep, graphics rep, they're all kind of, you wouldn't even see that. There's a config option to enable it. But what PTC has done is they are saying out of the box, you are going to retrieve components using this automatic rep, which knows to retrieve the lightest possible geometry or references that is required to retrieve it, and also for faster regeneration. But when you try to select the geometry or features on demand, it will retrieve it. So it's kind of like the old on-demand rep, right? Wherein you had to retrieve the graphics rep first, and then on demand, get the master. But now the software is doing it for you automatically. So that is the biggest enhancement when it comes to regeneration in large assemblies. And what we have done is we have done some what's new specific webinars on Creo 4.0, what is new. In that, where we have gone in depth into part modeling, user interface, assemblies, etc. as what's new in Creo 4. That would help. Okay, there's another question. Prior to Creo 3, when you would export a .stl file, right, the customize export option would automatically come up. Now, Creo 4, you need to select a checkbox. Is there a way to have the checkbox automatically selected? That's a good question. There is no config.pro per se right now for that, but that's something I'll look it up. If there's any hidden config options to enable that automatically. Okay, so it looks like there are no more questions. Let me just check one more time. Okay. All right, so thank you all for your time. We look forward to seeing you soon in our next webinar. Feel free to check our website here, where you have information about the time-limited offers and also the upcoming webinars that we run. Right, they're also listed here. And this is the resource I was talking about. When you go to TriStar.com, Resource Center and CAD, we have archived all the webinar recordings. It's also available in our YouTube channel. And one other resource is the Learning Exchange and the knowledge base that will help all users of Creo. Okay. So with that, yeah, thanks all, and you all have a great rest of the week and a great weekend. Looking forward to seeing you all soon in our next webinar. Thank you.